Hello. Hi, Filipa. How are you?
Hello, Mohamed. All good. How are you?
All good, all good. Thank you for accepting our invite, joining this episode, talking about the most buzzword now, AI, and how the
It
data
is.
infrastructure is affecting the future of AI for us. But let me, at the beginning, just to introduce you briefly to our audience. Then I'll let the floor for you to explain more about your background. Hello for everyone is watching us on our channels, YouTube, Twitch, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Today we have Filipa. She is a seasoned data and AI solution architect at Microsoft. Currently, she's based in Dubai with a background in cloud, analytics, and AI deployment beside the data architecture. She helps enterprises, clients to design and scale secured, and that's very important, the secured, high-performing AI solutions on Azure. Welcome, Filipa, for our episode today. Please feel free to explain more about your background, about what you would like to share with us today in the episode.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. So, I think for my background, that would be a whole other session because my background is quite diverse. But thank you so much for the opportunity to talk today with you around AI and also like the infrastructure essentials. So, we'll talk a little bit about data architecture, security, and the overall wrap up of AI buzzwords. So what I currently do is I'm a cloud solution architect, like Mohammed was mentioning, and I work in data and AI. I'm super attached to anything related to analytics from on-prem to the clouds, and of course, most recently on AI and the agentic AI as well. So I think that's the setup for today.
Interesting. Before we start our conversation, I'd like to remind our audience feel free to post your question or comment in whatever channel you're watching us. If we find some time at the end, definitely we can take some. But let's start with the foundation. When any kind of enterprise or business nowadays tries to implement or think about AI adoption or AI transformation, the first thing come to their minds and decision makers at these enterprises, the security, and where to start, and what should be considered, and what are the most critical stages to prepare the data for successful AI implementation, especially no data, no AI. What do you think about preparing for this kind of preparations for the data itself?
All right, that's a very good question. So I think nowadays we do value AI more than ever. Of course, AI has been around for a couple of years, not just now, but now we are actually having it at the end of our fingertips. And
Yeah.
basically, AI is only as good as the data behind it, right? So we had kind of like a start on data, let's say 20 years ago, with the new relational databases coming through. And then we moved for something like structured databases from an Excel sheet, which a couple of people still like it, right? And that's nothing wrong around it, but it's not really a database. And then we moved for something a little bit bigger, like big data, right? Where we don't have structured data anymore. We actually have unstructured data, and we need to take meaningful decisions of it. So, whatever you're doing in AI right now has to come from a good quality data in the background, right? So, it is really important to keep whatever work we've been doing so far on cleaning, completing, and contextualizing the data. This is not negotiable, right? You cannot ask a model that has crappy AI or crappy data to actually give you a meaningful result, right? So if you don't have the correct data, you're not going to get good output. At the same time, it's really important to also think about not just the preparation of data and why is this important on AI. We all clarify that and we all understand this, but also
Mhm.
like thinking about a responsible preparation, right? So, for example, thinking about how you are going for like a bias check of your data. It's different if I have a data set of women and men, if I'm only going for a product for women, for example. So this can be an example of like being biased or being like something that it's not so relevant for our model or a little bit more over than the reference we have and the base we want to have. It's also important to think about labeling our data and versioning, right? So our data is going to change. Like you don't usually have something that just appends new data. It happens that all your data can actually change. So you can have versions of your data and not just the data, but even your models on AI, right? And
Hmm.
I would say like a couple of mistakes that happen very frequently is we see our customers like moving directly to the point of setting their AI tool and their AI model and just want to use AI without with skipping the basics. For example, when we talk about not involving domain experts, I'm not just talking about technical folks that are going to develop the AI model, but actually like data engineers or even analysts, right, that are going to communicate what the business needs with the technical folks who are going to develop it. So basically, I would say if you want AI that it's trusted and scalable, that can increase with your requests and requirements in the future, you need to start very strong with the data that you have as well.
Yeah, that's very important. We saw this a big challenge for multiple clients that
Hmm.
you are very motivated to use the AI, but the main bottleneck for them is data.
Yeah,
Sometimes they don't know even they have the proper data or not, or if they
yeah.
have it, is it clean enough to get proper results or not?
Yeah. And even not just clean, but if it's meaningful. For example, you may not want a transaction level of your data, right? You may want just an aggregation of that data. And
Hmm.
this takes time to transform and take care of. Like you
Yeah.
don't take a lot of meaning from an Excel sheet with like, I don't know, hundreds of columns and thousands of rows. You don't take meaningful insights on this. This is just data. It's not yet aggregated to the point of calling it
Mm.
information or helping you on a decision making process. It's just there. And then multiply it by, I don't know, hundreds or dozens of Excel sheets that, let's say, a company produces every day. How are you humanly going to process all of this and think about just moving to AI directly? There is a need to actually work on that data, massage that data, even select what really matters, and then make it like into a model or I don't know, some sort of AI model or something. So even before thinking of the model, what do you actually need from the data? I see this in a lot of customers, like the fear of missing out of the data. Let's bring
Yeah.
everything and do a report with everything we have. It doesn't matter what. And then you're just bloating that report model. When we think about AI, this is the context that you're going to give to your model. Is it that
Mm.
meaningful that you have like all the logs of a machine or all the IDs? Probably not, right? So there
Yeah.
is a lot of work to be done on the data engineering side for
Yeah.
sure. I
Interesting.
would say,
Mhm.
yeah,
And this definitely it affects the quality of the model responses whenever we are adding
yeah,
just anything on our way from our old data logs. Definitely, there will be some responses, but the quality of the responses and hallucination level of the models, it's totally different when we have, as you said, meaningful data. That means
yeah,
we need to do the homework first to prepare the proper data. Not about having, you're right, not about having a clean data, but meaningful data. That's very
yeah,
important.
exactly. Yeah,
Interesting.
I think so, especially for choosing a model that will help you on what you're looking for. If you are an HR assistant, why would you have, for example, data from your machinery? Like this is
Mm.
totally unrelated. There is no
Yeah,
context for anyone from HR that can
yeah, yeah,
actually take from there. So it's quite important, yes,
yeah,
for
yeah.
preparing your data.
Very important. That's very smart, and that's part of our methodology to implement AI for enterprises and SMEs.
Hmm.
Having a subject matter expert in the process of the adoption of AI and
Yeah,
transformation is crucial for that reason, to
yeah,
define what is the required data and even to adjust the results we get from the AI.
exactly.
Without having an expert who will judge the results from the AI, no one can trust the AI except the expert who will guide and direct the learning even process for the AI
Yeah,
models.
yeah,
This takes me to the other point, which is scalability. Regarding the AI now, every day are new updates happening, new models are released, new businesses and companies and solutions are there. The updates is very accelerating on a daily
yeah.
life now. How do you think the businesses or enterprises need to consider the scalability part of the AI when they adopt and implement AI to have a more structured and scalable architectures when we talk about AI, considering this kind of crazy or very accelerated updates and changes?
Good question. I think even for developers, that's a hard one. because whoever works on the models, like it's literally like next day you have 50 new deployments of something new, models, new technology, new tools, etc. So I would say it's not just about the technology, but also about the adaptability of the model as well.
Yeah.
How good is it for the data that you will have tomorrow, the model that you are creating and testing and training today? So I would say it's very important to build not just for scale, but for change in the future as well. Like you should be able to accommodate whatever is going to be needed on the business side with that model and AI, right? So, for example, have something that it's modular, right? That you can change small pieces of it, or anything like cloud flexible, even like if it makes sense to choose and go for a hybrid approach instead of like being only for one choice or the other. And then I would say another concept from data analytics and from data engineering is the data mesh, where you should be able to keep alignment between the business domains of your company. So not so much on the model itself, but like the data mesh concept of organizing the house per domains, right? So your organization has, let's say, HR, logistics, operations, I don't know, like different areas of the company. What kind of data pertains to each area, and what kind of modeling are you building that it's ready for the data that changes on each one of them, or chaotically using everything for the same model for the same domain? So I think that's very important. I think using something that it's not, again, fixed but actually changes with
Mm.
time, and it's possible to adjust, it's also very important. So it's not really about increasing the use or increasing the size, whatever the GPUs, whatever you want to call it, but actually building for any change you're going to need to implement tomorrow on that model with the data you have.
Hmm. Makes sense. Yeah, flexibility is more than just scalability, if we can say.
Yeah.
And that is, yeah, we faced such like an example with one of our clients. They were trying to implement a local models on smartphones, and the models that we were testing, it was very big in terms of size in gigabytes. But after a few weeks, there was more models, very smart, very compatible with more smartphone devices,
Yeah.
and even in size. That means we're not just looking for a bigger storage space on the cloud or on our hardware, but it even might have lower size. That means, as you said, flexibility on a change.
Yeah.
That's very
Yeah.
important.
I
Yeah.
think another consideration we have to think about is when you are developing your own model, it's customized to your needs, right? Versus using something more generic that can be
Yeah.
adjusted and used by anyone, because it's more of an assistant than actually a model with your data, trained and tested with your data.
Hmm.
So, yes, it may mean that today, let's say I'm doing a retail model, and this is quite generic, right? It's like predicting, I don't know, or forecasting like sales, or like classifying customers, or doing something like predicting if that specific churn or that specific amount of customers segment is coming back in a week or two, what can I sell them? So when we talk about this can happen that today this model is quite good for you and it has been tested with your data, but it becomes obsolete tomorrow, because then tomorrow another model comes and it's even, I don't know, trained in more data or in specific variables, or I don't know, parameters of the model that somehow bring more meaning for tomorrow decision. So it's really important that whatever you're building, it's very flexible, not
Hmm.
just sizing wise in storage, because storage is actually quite cheap in cloud, but in terms of processing capacity and
Yeah.
flexibility as well. So yeah, that's a very good point.
Interesting. Just to, some audience more can get more relations on what we are trying to advise and share with them by some examples. Can you share
Mhm.
with us like some examples of success stories for projects or clients that when we did the solid data and architecture, it got a very successful implementation, or even the opposite, totally opposite, a failure story whenever we didn't implement the proper architecture and solid data?
Of course. Let's start with the good news first.
Good.
So, a little bit of both. I think whenever we have a request and the requirement of starting these use cases, the picture is not always very clear. right? So I don't think I ever had like end-to-end perfect solution development, deployment, etc., and testing. This is a unicorn, doesn't exist. So whenever you have a request, there is always a point that is going to miss. Typically, that point is on the data quality, or missing data, or values that don't adjust, don't make sense. So, for example, a success story that I have, and again, I'm in Dubai, so Microsoft here, for example, has quite a big program of like, for example, assisting citizens, business citizens here onto learning AI. And of course, we do have initiatives. We have been in multiple expositions where we have come together for, I don't know, for example, in my latest example, I was involved into an avatar, for example, having a local person, imagine as an hologram style, as an assistant during an exposition for a certain area. This was for oil and energy sector, and it was pretty cool. It was available in the exposition, so it's a free and public use case where it started with a dream of having someone, real size avatar, helping, kind of an assistant, but not a chatbot, a real image. So imagine you are in Dubai, there is a certain custom, right, on how the local people and the local culture works, and how this also looks to the eye of the foreigners who visit us. So it was
Yeah.
pretty interesting where we had data from that company, and of course we had the feature store, so whatever they needed in that model feature wise to be selected, and then we had an avatar talking with people in real time around their data. Of course, in here, there is a subset of data selected because it's an exposition. So, of course, it's a very public or customer service, let's say, sort of style of avatar. But it was pretty neat to have this. And it was quite cool. We built this in 2 weeks, very quick. Of course, we are Microsoft, so it makes a difference, your own product. But it was
Yeah.
a team effort as well. Like we involved not just the customer, but even internally, it was quite new and innovative solution as well. This is a success because we made it end to end, we made it happen. And trust me, it wasn't easy, but it was a very good example on how you have governed data, you have alignment from the customer requirement, etc. And you also have whatever you need to be selected in that model and to be personalized, right, at scale. And that's what we did. In terms of failure, I don't think there is like a failure per se, like let's abort the program or the project, not like that. But I would say, again, the hard parts are, or the hardest parts are definitely the data quality piece, or for example, not knowing who are the end users of your model. That's a concern. I'm sure we'll talk about security later, but that's a concern we should really keep in mind in AI. When you develop a model and you train this with a certain data point that you actually don't want to be exposed, but guess what? Your model was trained in that data point. So of course it will deep dive and probably even show that data, and it becomes hard to think and control access to that through a model, right? If you enable this model internally in a company, for example, that can be something not everyone thinks before it actually happens. So yeah, I would say that's the two use cases, good and bad.
Interesting. Interesting. That's as we were talking about the data is very important
Mhm.
part of the AI adoption. Without data, no AI, if we can say this that. But my question for you in this area, how do you think organizations should decide between the lacking of data or the data warehousing when we build an AI capabilities that should be used in-house for this kind of business or
Yeah,
enterprise?
very good question. So I come from the analytics background. I have my love for data warehouses, of course, but of
Yeah.
course there is an evolution, right? So we are not anymore on relational database concept because not all our data is structured, right? We don't have just Excel sheets and pretty tables organized, incomplete or not, but we do have lakes of data where we literally dump whatever we have, being structured or not, being a log, being machine readable or human readable, right? Like you can have CSV or you can have an image or a JSON or I don't know, like a snippet of code or Python or you name it. And each one is going to fit its purpose. When we talk about the data warehouse, definitely it's for governed and structured data. And when we talk about the lake, it's for raw and exploratory analysis, right? And this data lake concept is very interesting because it removes the need of structuring all your data before you actually have to feed it, for example, for a model. So this data lake is where I see a lot of organizations benefiting from. However, a hybrid approach can also be taken here. I work a lot with a product called Microsoft Fabric, where we actually mention and recommend the customers medallion architecture, which comes from Databricks technology. And this medallion architecture is a layer or 3 layers of curating your data through a raw state to a gold layer where you can feed reports. So by the end of the day, it's definitely going to be according to what the customer needs, right? If you ask me, look, I have a customer who needs an AI project and they are going to involve their data science team, etc., probably they want to access the data before it's aggregated to a level of the reports, right? Probably they need to access this data to a level where they may want to create, for example, a model on data quality on top of the data that's missing, for example, or they want to have some sort of, I don't know, some framework of qualifying the data and choosing that is not good versus what really matters. And that's typically done in an intermediate layer, not in a warehouse. But the warehouses are not dead, and they are quite useful for more into the reporting layer. I wouldn't say for AI as much, but it really depends what you're looking for as well.
Interesting. That takes us to another challenge, and definitely I see for all kind of enterprises, whatever the size of the business, which is the unstructured data. As you said at the beginning, it's not about how much data we have or even how clean, but it's how meaningful the data
Yeah.
we have to save the resources of processing power required for this AI application or models. But now for the unstructured data, even with multiple formats like text, images, videos, data logs, whatever kind of data, how do you think the best way for enterprises to deal and handle such an unstructured or scattered data?
Yeah, very good question. I think the earlier the data is processed, the merrier, right? So you have to think about if you're going to need this, you need to have an implementation plan on data transformation, cleaning, processing. Otherwise, it will be a mess, right? And it is common to have more than a data source, like hundreds of data sources, and to think of a way to put it in a structured format or an organized platform, not structured, but actually organized way to feed different areas of the projects. For example, when we talk about AI or when we talk about simple reporting, for example. So it is quite important to organize it at earlier stages if you are able to, right? Or, for example, enforce some sort of masking from your CRM systems, like where you are making sure the completeness of data is there. But at the same time, when we talk about unstructured data, you will need way more than this. You will need more than just completing the data. You will need classifying that data, tagging it, even vector search that data, for example, right? So you may need to use like any cloud native tools to actually automate this handling. Like think about, I don't know, a function on Azure, for example, or any sort of orchestrator of this data and put it in a platform or in a SQL database or any OSS open source database, for example, because it's going to be a big chunk of data. And then it's about discovering this data, not just storing it, because you will be doing the same we have done for years, which is store all my data and leave it there to die. I have no interpretation of this data and nothing. It's just because I'm scared of losing it in the next 10 years or something.
Yeah, the power of
So
ownership. We need to own everything.
yes, it's kind of a hoarding moment, right? For, I don't know, businesses. So
Yeah.
I think discoverability here is key, right? Not just storage, but discoverability. Like, what are you going to do with this data? Is this something that you're going to need later? Are you planning to actually use it and process it later, feed it to a model or AI, or I don't know, like when you're just storing, there is no meaningful process happening there. You're storing it. Maybe you have a requirement, like for example, of storing this data. That's what we see in multiple entities, right? Like multiple organizations, they have a requirement of storing all their data. So maybe that's one story. But when we talk about meaningful process, definitely there has to be a push in a mindset of not just storing, but making it discoverable or maybe even accessible to some users and some teams that are going to process and bring the next stage of that data, right? The next step of like AI or reporting or decision making even.
Interesting. That's an important factor to implement definitely AI regarding the data management, the data cleaning, and I know this is a bit hard for businesses. Honestly, I worked for
Yeah.
corporate for a long time, and whatever data we were able to collect, just we were getting it. We might need it like after 100, 200 years. Who
Yeah.
knows? That's a big challenge and a big problem. But the other challenge nowadays, whenever we're talking about AI, and honestly, this is the first question most of the business leaders asking us for our advice on regarding the security,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially when we try to implement these AI models. Definitely, it will be very high cost whenever we're implementing such AI models on their in-house, in-premises servers or whatever. But how do you think the security is considered when we talk about AI implementation for enterprises, when we deploy different AI models, especially in on the cloud environments,
Yeah.
considering the fact that a lot of hardware companies like Nvidia and even Microsoft, they started to promote for the concept of you need to own your AI and you need to own your hardware to run your AI models. On the
Hmm.
opposite side, running the AI models on servers on cloud, how the security can be managed, or how can they think of it, is it is doable without harming the data or harming the confidential
Hmm.
things you need to protect.
Yeah, great question. So I think we cannot really afford to bolt on security. It has to be built in, right? So whatever cloud environment, for example, you're choosing, it has to have the minimum security platform available for you and features, right? For example, encryption of data. This is something that we have built in on all the Azure products we have. Or, for example, restrict the access to that data directly, or even monitor the models that you are deploying, right? But on
Mhm.
the other hand, this is like platform enabled, right? But you need to think about the next step, not just at the level of the data and the model monetization, etc., but planning for attacks. For example, if anyone is going to abuse your model or, I don't know, ingest something that it's going to corrupt the model a little bit, like in going to another direction instead of the training set that you had. So, a couple of things here are when you are planning for attacks, it is important that you think about how the model can make incorrect predictions as well. So, we are not just talking about the AI or the data security, right? We are talking about also the AI model security, which is very
Mm.
typically overlooked part of the deployment. So it's something that typically comes after when it's already deployed, and then no one knows how to answer correctly, or it's a problem. So when you think about making, for example, incorrect predictions, this is obviously a problem in AI, right? Because you may misclassify an image, or you may, let's say, you're applying this model at healthcare, and then you have, I don't know, an X-ray or an ultrasound that it's incorrectly misclassified, and let's say that you go after this step, but you don't have a human intervening on this. This can be something very crucial and very impactful, right?
Yeah.
In a wrong sense. So it is very important to design to like the model in a way that it cannot be fooled, right? And it has to be obviously very tested. On the other hand, we also have how a specific data point, just like I mentioned before, can interfere in the future. So imagine you are training your model, right? You have a training set and your model is being built around that point, that specific data point. Imagine this is a very, very PII data. And then you are exposing this into your model because it's a serious privacy risk as well. So you have to think about whatever you train your model, that's going to come back later, right? So if you're using private very PII data, that can also be an issue. So a couple of things that happened before, you're probably well, this was like 2 years ago or more, but when ChatGPT came, like in October 22, I believe, this was something that there were a couple of news of, for example, software engineers who were testing the code on ChatGPT. They were just writing, and then they would have a beautiful code's optimization or whatever, like a script a little bit better than the one they put there. This is a problem because every model that you are feeding the data to, even if it's a snippet of code, it's building its knowledge on what you say. So this is a big issue in terms of privacy. So if you put your data there and it's PII data, obviously this is going to come back. And it's not a good practice for anyone to put their own private data on a model that is publicly used, right?
Yeah.
I would say, for example, responsible AI and governance as well should be ensured when we talk about security. So making sure that there is fairness and evaluate the bias across, for example, demographics and kind of mitigate this, right? But also make sure you can explain and provide outputs especially in regulated sectors that follow compliance like GDPR or HIPAA or any other like compliance rule or regulation. And at the same time, make it auditable, right? You have logs and you have model decisions that can be traced as well. So it should not be left alone just because it's an AI model. It should actually be traced later and always, always keep improving whatever you are observing and monitor it. This is not just for AI, it's for any service on IT, especially on cloud.
Yeah.
It should be monitored, right? For its performance, for its, in this case, not just performance, but explainability and bias, right? So I think it's very critical to observe and definitely make sure the correct people have the correct access to the model as well, or the correct users as well.
Yeah, that's totally true, and that's part of the fear of using and adopting AI
Yeah.
regarding the risk behind the way we train and educate the AI models on our data and how it might fire back and make any problem troubles for us in the future. But having an expert or a domain expert in not only the domain itself that we implement AI for, but as well in the security part and the data part, it's very important in the transformation journey because it's a journey. It's not just
Yes.
like implementing
Definitely.
a platform like the normal digital transformation. The AI transformation, it's not just a snapshot of something we need to implement. It has a lot of steps, and even after the deployment, definitely you know this, we might need still keep monitoring, as you said,
Yes.
monitoring the
Yes.
behavior of those AI models. And that takes us
Yeah.
to the next important point regarding the, the ethical part of using an AI model. How do you think organizations can embed the ethical principles or the responsible AI practices on their infrastructures? Is it
Yeah.
doable even, or how do you think this can be implemented?
Okay. If we go a step back for the previous question onto what you just mentioned around like thinking how this can be implemented, etc., I would say this is not something that we do again just at an AI project, right? So it's not new for the digital faults. I would say the IT people to actually monitor it and think about logs and follow it through. But now we are talking about something that's at the use of every user, at the exposure, sorry, of every user, every end user, right? So I
Mhm.
think that's also a big difference from the previous digital projects we have in IT, where typically you would have, like, for example, end users that would just, like analysts, for example, before it reached the VP, etc. Now you're talking about something that it's deployed worldwide for everyone. Of
Yeah.
course, we're talking about an organization, it's smaller set or scale, but you can have an organization that it's exposing, like, for example, a model or making like a customer's support model, like let's say a bot, for example, but with the data from the company or from the customer itself, right? So this is a different scale that we are talking about. I think that's why AI sometimes it's so hard to control for some users because it's just being used very broadly and the scale is huge.
Mhm.
And now when we talk about ethical and responsible AI, I think it's for the whole life cycle, not just steps of the development of the model, for example, right? So
Mhm.
when we talk about embedding like correct ethical principles and practices on the architecture or infrastructure of your AI model or adoption project, whatever, it's not just during the model development, but it's on the entire AI lifecycle. So I would say definitely points like responsible AI, where you have fairness in the metrics that you are evaluating, the explainability of the model as well, the documentation that was fed to the model, even, right?
Mhm.
And the diverse voices during design of your model, for example, to improve your outcomes. So this infrastructure should be built definitely to support transparency and think about having AI governance frameworks, for example, where you can standardize policies, right? Like guidelines for data sourcing or using the model. How is the usage done, or how you mitigate bias, or even simply having human oversight, right? I don't think we are yet at the level of like leaving it all for AI to handle and be self-sufficient. There has to be some human oversight, even if it's just at the downstream of utilizing it, right? Whatever feedback you have from an end user on your model, it's definitely very important. For example, we do have Microsoft is a good example. We have, for example, Copilot, right? It's known by everyone, just like
Yeah.
ChatGPT. So imagine like if you would ignore what the end users say about the usability of the model and the assistant and even the features that are selected on the product, it's important to hear what our users say and how good the model is, how practical the tool is, and correct as well. Integrating AI into machine learning infrastructure is also very important when we talk about bias in the data. Just what I said before, if you are looking for something that is commonly going to be used worldwide, you cannot have a subset of data, right? You cannot think about data that it's like pushing for one side or the other of the
Yeah.
equation here. So it
Mhm.
is also super important to track whatever sources you're using, right? Like obviously, if I'm in the Middle East, it doesn't make sense maybe to use demographics like I don't know in South America or something like really far away. So
Mhm.
it's a little bit on developing the model, considering the fairness that you have and explainability. Like, for example, there are libraries for that as well while you're developing your model. And also, one very important topic, consider, for example, synthetic data, because not all the data that you have is going to be public, right? So when you're talking about privacy during model training, synthetic data is definitely a step up here as well, where you can use this data. It will still give you meaningful results, but it's not like like compromising how good the model is. At the same time, it's not exposing the data that should not be exposed. That it's super private to each one of us. And
Mhm.
definitely enforce transparency and accountability. Like, what's this model for? What's the purpose? What's the limitation? What trained data was used to set it up? So, and evaluate all the models and the data sets as well. So, I would say it's quite a sensitive topic, of course.
Yeah.
And in sensitive use cases like hiring, for example, someone in HR, having the human oversight, it's very important on the decision making process.
Interesting. I think the implementation of AI, it has like a combination of multiple stakeholders, or even more than the typical digital transformation, because we have business stakeholders, we have AI teams that's totally
Yeah.
different than the software engineers, beside the data architecture and the security and all of these things. How do you think the kind of what we can call it an effective collaboration between all of these different stakeholders with different backgrounds when we try to build and implement enterprise AI?
Yeah. Not just different backgrounds, but different goals, right? Like a software engineer is having fun on this, whereas a business leader needs to have the ROI of investment on all of this development.
Yeah.
So I think the best AI projects, and not just AI, all the best projects I've ever worked start with good cross-functional alignment as well. So we are not just talking about the knowledge, but if everyone is up to date with what's going on, to be honest, when we talk about AI or even IT or data or business collaboration, right? So the business is going to define why something is done, but the data is going to bring the what, right? And the IT is going to deliver the how. So they are going to make it happen. But when you don't have a good agile and shared KPIs, for example, among the teams, there is no real collaboration. There is just people with different goals and trying to overlap all of them in the same thing, in the same project. So it is super important to have this alignment. I think in AI, we have a different ethical consideration. Of course, we should think about what is this going to imply in the future of the organization as well, like in terms of, I don't know, like you will have new functions to be unlocked, but is this really helping someone, or is it this simply like when we talk about numbers or headcount, what should be considered here as well? And I think that's a big point for a lot of people, and for a lot of not just software engineers, but everyone from engineers and ICs, individual contributors, to management as well. And it's good that we align that, because by the end of the day, we are all humans. We will all have our fears and misconceptions about something, and they grow if they are not clarified, right? So I think aligning, it's super important, and making it a common goal between everyone in the teams and everyone in the organization where we are heading next. So that transparency, it's really important for enabling correct and real collaboration as well.
Interesting. I think, as you said, it's the alignment about the different goals and different across different teams, and that's very important whenever we're talking about the AI adoption and AI transformation, because it's a long journey. It's not just something we implement nowadays and just use it. And
Yeah.
that takes me to the next discussion point regarding sustainability and impact. As you said, business people always are looking for impact, ROI, and these kind of things. But to have and consider sustainability, how do you think companies can be align their AI infrastructure with the sustainability goals? That's the first part of the point. What do you think?
So this is a special topic for me because my bachelor is in biology. So I really like environmental and sustainability topics. I know about my company on this one,
Yeah, yeah.
but what I have to add is definitely efficiency is not a climate goal only. It's actually a business goal. If you notice, for example, we had COP28 in Dubai
Mm,
almost 2 years ago, and
yeah,
the amount of people that show there are not typically the, let's say, like the people you're expecting to think about environment, like biologists or scientists. No, we had C-levels and executive level and even the sheikh of UAE. So all of these different people bring to the table a different goal, but it's a common background, which is, or a common base, which is
yeah.
environmental. We all know there is an issue on sustainability. The planet is not going to dure forever. So we know there are limited resources and not everyone is privileged enough to access them, unfortunately. So, of course, AI should help build this and fight it, right? Because
Yeah.
it is a climate and a business goal. So, if we are now bringing AI into the table, why should we forget about these common issues, right? Like climate, etc. So, it is important to use, for example, lighter models or something that is going to consume less, or thinking about how you can optimize your pipelines, right? Like
Mhm.
in the future. But also, for example, we do have green cloud regions in Microsoft. So some of our data centers, for example, they are in locations where not a lot of energy or less energy is spent to cool off data centers, for example. So this is a choice that it's made. It's quite funny because when I started in Microsoft 5 years ago, I would never think, okay, how am I going to like improve sustainability by telling a customer to choose a product over the other? No, it's not about that. It's about it goes to the level of the product, but also like the data center region. How is this utilized, right? And many other factors as well. Like you can, for example, think about optimization. You can think about reducing the charge that is done each model runs, for example, or for example, should you run a model for longer, or and let it like do it in a smaller computational power place, or let it run shorter but use more resources. So we do have in Microsoft a sustainability calculator as well, which is pretty cool to think about. Like it's not just a sexy topic, it's actually something that has a future. And I think more and more companies are thinking about it. And data strategy is directly impactful on the environmental footprint of an organization. So this is definitely a thought, a food for thought, I would say,
Hmm.
not just for projects, but actually what you are running and what is that spending at the end of the day.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Regarding the data efficiency, what is the role does the data efficiency play based on this kind of sustainability constraints, security, and all the details you shared?
Can you repeat that? Sorry, Mohammed, I lost
Yeah,
you.
what role does data efficiency play
Okay,
whenever we're
so
talking about
imagine,
sustainability?
yeah, of course, imagine you're running something for 10 hours versus 5 hours. That's already a decrease, right, by half. And when we say run, whatever runs on the cloud is supported by a data center that exists physically, right? And it's spending machines, it's spending compute, it's spending like something powerful enough, right,
Sure.
to
Yeah.
support that. Like cloud is not on the other, right? It actually exists. It's supported by a bunch of servers in a
Yeah.
data center, right? So when we talk about using that for 10 hours versus five, that's already an improvement, right?
Ah,
And it
okay.
makes a difference, not just sustainability, but also pocket wise, of course. So it's an
Hmm.
optimization. But I was saying if you should think about, for example, running longer, but in smaller computational power, or running shorter, but in a higher or a biggest amount of compute. So that's also a trade off that you have to consider. Like our calculator is pretty good on that. It's pretty interesting.
Interesting.
And I think more and more solutions are coming for
Mhm.
sustainability. Even in Microsoft, we have like the ERG, which is the sustainability reporting specific per metrics of the organizations and areas of like retail or FSI, for example. But at the same time, we have solutions developed like templates already existing just for sustainability in our data platforms as well. In AI, this is definitely a good thing for the next projects.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think part of this point, the sustainability and the data efficiency to be more sustainable, again,
Yeah.
it backs to your first point, which is data, meaningful data, not
Yeah.
just get
Exactly.
anything, just save
Exactly.
time, save cost, save even the power of your servers and machines by
Of
just
course.
getting the proper data for your models to train, not just everything.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. We're coming to very close to the end. Just reminding our audience, if you do have any questions, please drop in the comments. We might take some at the end. But every time we talk with an expert like you, we always need to learn about the trends. But my question
Of
is
course.
split in two parts. The first one, what trends do you think organizations should keep in mind or learning about whenever we're talking about AI infrastructure? And how do you think organizations or businesses need to be prepared to evolve with the technology, especially with this accelerated changes and updates in the AI?
Yeah. Well, that's a very hard question. In terms of updates and actualizations, like so the trends right now are not just the models that we heard 2 years ago, like GPT, etc. Now we have, for example, agentic AI, where you're not just doing something to help you think, but actually to help you do, which is great because it means we are making things happen, not just how do we do it, it's actually how do we make it happen now. And a lot on the AI trend goes for agentic AI, of course. So this is definitely something that is a trend right now. I think another thing to consider is for example, all the foundational models that you have, right? And all this agent story now coming together. So whatever you have been doing before, it doesn't mean it's obsolete already. And
Mhm.
definitely it won't be if it's something that it has been customized and curated for your company. But thinking how you can take the next step for not just showing how something is helping you, but or assisting you, but making things happen. So one good example is, for example, in my MBA capstone, we made this crazy tool. Of course, it was not like working yet like a production level, but our tool was around. Okay, we have the assistant and we are doing a business plan on it. But what's the next step? How do we actually make this a diverse product and we bring value proposition to our tool, right? So it's not just about, in our case, we had a venture capital tool that would help our, for example, our angel investors or like any VC person to choose a startup. But then there was something missing, like how do you continue this collaboration with the startup to invest? How do you think about the next step of making something happen, like network and due diligence?
Hmm.
So that's when we understood, look, we are missing the action and not just the point of the model, but something to come afterwards. And definitely that will be a next trend. Like we are already seeing that you can build agents with copilots, and it's something that it's already a template that it's there
Yeah.
for any user. It's not just about chatting with Copilot, helping it, I don't know, craft your emails or summarize your meetings. No, it's actually about next step. How do I evaluate something and put an action on my model? So
Hmm.
pretty cool. That's the
Interesting.
trend. Yeah.
I think this changing a lot of even way of thinking to solve a lot of
Yeah.
problems we face. It's becoming much easy now to build like a low code, no code agent using Copilot or
Yes.
using other tools
Yeah.
just by even by chatting. I just brainstorm with the agent builder and explain more about my challenge, about my objective, and it starts to get me something. I
Yeah.
think this will change a lot of things in the near future. And whenever we talk about the AI, whenever we say near future, it means days, not
Yeah. It's
years.
not a year or two. It's actually like tomorrow, next week, next month.
Next
Yeah.
week, yeah.
Yeah. Until a really cool, crazy feature comes out and you're like blown away. So yeah, pretty cool.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. I think we got to the end. The conversation with you, Filipa, is amazing. I learned a lot about the thoughts of the infrastructure, the data, and the data is always like a nightmare for businesses whenever we need to get clean data. Whenever, and you refer to a very important point regarding data, meaningful data. I think this
Yeah.
could be the quote of the conversation. Having meaningful data for AI is everything, not just data, not just a lot of data. It's meaningful data for
Yeah.
sustainability, for saving cost, for even flexibility of building your AI models.
Definitely. Yeah. I think one good point is, again, if we talk about flexibility, is like building with this flexibility, right? So there are so many tools that it's also an interesting point of exploring what's in there, right? Like,
Mhm.
and nowadays everything is quite connected and OSS. So you have a lot of open source and
Yeah.
learning communities as well. And
Mhm.
I think the problem is to select which one you want to start with, because there are
Yeah.
a lot of options. Yeah. And I, even myself, I find myself like kind of confused on what to recommend people. I try to assess their level of technicality, but if I
Hmm.
have to recommend something, it's becoming harder and harder because there are a lot of courses, a lot of specialists on AI.
Hmm.
And then by the end of the day, if you want to do hands-on, that's something else, right? Than just talking about it,
Interesting.
or like being a specialist as an end user perspective. So yeah,
Okay.
it's definitely stay connected to any
Interesting.
community.
This could be a question. Like I need to get your feedback about, and that because that's definitely a challenge for me as well to define which proper tool to use. How do you think we might, even for us, to decide on which models or which tools? Today,
Have you?
if ChatGPT released a new model that's crazy,
Yeah,
that's very smart, like after 2 weeks, Gemini will do. After another 2 weeks, Claude
yeah.
will do. How we can just, yeah, we get the updates but without getting distracted in a lot of all of these changes. Do you have a technique to define where to go, where to
Yeah, have you asked the AI, Mohammed?
it will be biased in if you ask ChatGPT, recommend
More or
ChatGPT.
less. Yeah, I think, yeah, maybe. I have never tested that. That's interesting. I may try that after this call. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
I think
I
very
think it
challenging.
depends. It depends what you're looking for, and the interface is very important, right? So I obviously prefer Copilot, but for example,
Hmm.
for my internal business purpose, because I'm from Microsoft, so it really helps me internally to my professional life, right? Whatever I need to organize, I use Copilot immediately.
Hmm.
But if I would go for a more personal approach, I like to explore. So
Yeah.
I've used a bunch of things, different stuff. So I won't name them, obviously, but everyone knows it. So it's not just one or two. There are so many things. And
Yeah. Yeah.
then in my MBA, that's where I got to try all of them because we were trying, like, what's the best tool to look for this info or to look for more math or calculation oriented things.
Hmm.
So definitely be open to try. I don't think locking in one of it. It's a smart approach because you may like one more than others. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
a good approach.
very true.
Keep it open. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Great, amazing. And I would like to thank you, Filipa, for your time today, for the very adding value concepts
Thank
and
you.
experience for our audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.